In this lesson, we are going to do some fast API practice. We are going to explore one task and the solution of this task so you can grasp the understanding of how you need to write your own fast API application, especially what types of validation you need to use, what are the steps you need to implement when you are working with fast API application. So imagine we are giving a task of building an API for student management system. So the API should allow users to perform operations like create, read, update, delete on student records. So you need to implement the following endpoints. Let's say first is the student ID. With the student ID, so the endpoint should retrieve the details of student based on their unique student ID. We need to have the get endpoint, get request to get all the students, so it's accepting query parameters such as name, age, grade to filter the list of the students, so it returns a list of students that match the provided filters. So we have the post request for the students, so it's checking if student ID already exists in the list of the students before adding a new item. So if the ID already exists, it's raising an HTTP exception. But these are the parameters that it expects. The API should also validate the payload and the return created student record. We also have the put request, which the endpoint should allow users to update the details of a student based on the student ID, and the API should accept the JSON payload with the following optional fields: the name, age, and the grade. And we have also the delete. This endpoint should delete student record based on their student ID. So here are the requirements for the project. So we need to implement a Pythonic model named student with the following fields. So the student ID, the unique identifier of the student, the name, the age, and the grade. So first, let's fulfill the requirement. So we are going to have the student ID, name, age, and the grade. Name, age, and the grade. So here I'm going to have the class student validated by the Pydantic base model. So I'm going to do necessary imports. So here I have the student ID, which is going to be integer. The name is going to be a string, is going to be a field with a minimum length of 1. The age is going to be greater than 0. And we will also have a grade, which is going to be a string, which is going to be a field with a minimum length of 1. We also need to implement its requirements written. We need to implement student request class, which is used to validate the request parameters when creating or updating a student record. So each field in the student request uses the field function from Pydantic to apply validation constraints. So here I'm going to use another class, student request, validated by the Pydantic base model. So here I need to specify the student ID, name, age, and the requirements for this when requesting something, with the field of greater than 0 for the student ID, the name of the minimum length, the age greater than 0, and the grade the minimum length of 1. Here it's written that implementing the fast API must fulfill all the requirements above, so we need to use appropriate path parameter and request bodies to handle the requests. So we also need to perform data validation using Pydantic models for the request payloads. Here this is written that student ID should be positive number field, not be equal to an empty string, the age should be a positive integer, etc. So we also need to handle errors or scenarios such as returning appropriate status code and error messages when a student record is not found and when invalid data is provided. So we are going to use everything we have learned so far in our project here. So after we have our student class, we have the student class base model, we are going to initialize, let's say, a random data set. So where we are going to keep all the students here. So we're going to keep all the students here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 students. In this case, with the IDs from 1 to 8, with the names, with the age, and with the grades. So this is going to be our sample data. So we are going to implement all the endpoints now. So we'll have the get endpoint, which is going to get the students by the student ID. So what we are going to do, we are going to iterate for student in students, and if the student ID is equal to student ID, we are going to return that student. Otherwise, we have learned how to raise the HTTP exception and raise the status code. In this case, we are going to raise the status code of 440. The student ID is not found in the database, and we are going to say that the student is not found. So the other request is going to be with the query parameters of name, age, and grade. So here we have the get request, I have the endpoint of slash students. So I have here the query parameters, the name, which is going to be string, age, which is going to be integer, grade, which is going to string. These are all optional parameters. We can set it to none. So we're going to say the filter student is currently students. If now we are going to say, if we have specified the name with the filter students, now going to be student for student in filter student if our specified name is equal to name in student.name. If we have specified .age with the same logic, we're going to say we're going to get the filter students for student in filter student if student age is equal to age. And if grade is specified, we're going to say that filter students equal to student for student in filter students if student grade equals to grade, and we are going to return this filter students. We're going to have the post request where we are going to add new students to our data. So we're going to say for existing student in students, if the specified ID is equal to the student ID, we will say that raising an HTTP exception of status code of 400, saying that the student ID already exists. We don't need to do anything and create a new one because it already exists. Otherwise, we're going to create a new student. It's going to be validated by the student identity clause. So it's going to be a student with this student ID equal to the student or student ID here, and the age, name, grade parameter all are specified also here, and we are going to append to the students list of the new student currently added in this post request. We are going to have the put request. This means we are going to update the data of some of the students here in our data. So we're going to iterate in our data, and we are going to say the student ID is equal to student ID. We are going to change the name, the age, the grade of the student, and in the end return the student. Otherwise, we are going to raise an HTTP exception with the status code of 404 and saying if you are specified the wrong student ID and we can't change anything, that means that the student is not found in the data, so we can't do anything. And in the end, we are going to use the delete student endpoint, which is going to iterate over our students and then find if the specified student ID is found in our data. Then it's going to just delete the student from the student data and is going to return a message that the student is deleted. And then otherwise, of course, is going to be raising an HTTP exception saying the status code is 404 and the student is not found, which we are going to delete. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy everything to our main.py. So if I go to our main.py here, I have everything here already. So I'm going to save everything here. And then if I now go to my terminal and then just run everything. So if I just go first navigate to our folder where the Python file is located, and then if I say just ubicorn main up minus reload, you can see that everything works without errors. If I go to localhost/docs, you can see that now I have all the endpoints. So I have the get student ID. We can go and just try it out. So we can go and say wants to get the student by the ID of 4 and execute this. And now I can see that the student with the ID 4 is returning to me with the status code of 200. I have the student ID 4 with the name, with the age, with the grade. So everything works correct. Let's try to experiment with other endpoints. We need to get all the students now. If I want to get the student by the age, let's try it out and find all the students, let's say with the age of 18. So if I go and find the students, you will see that I have 3 students with the age of 18. And now let's also filter by the grade. So if I go and filter by the grade and say I want the student by the grade of, let's say B, or I have just one student here. If I just try to execute this, you will see that I'm getting only one student in the case because only one student is age 18 and the grade is B. So it's working correctly. So you can yourself go to try yourself to post a new student in our record, specifying the ID, name, age, and the grade. We can also go and changing the data using the put request, specifying the student ID, and giving the new change data. And of course, you can also use the delete endpoint where you are going to use the student ID to delete something, and you are going in the end to delete the student from your data, to not have it anymore. So feel free to go and read the code, how you need to implement the fast API applications from scratch. They beautifully validated everything with the status code and stuff. And you can also, of course, go and add some tags and validation and some description and some summary, the response description here. After this, everything will work very perfect. So make sure that you can go experiment yourself to add some more validations and more information in the endpoint, so that the user, whoever is going to use your API, easily understand how the API works and how each point API must work in this case. So this is it for this lesson.